Hello, hello, hello. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and I'm going back into Liber ABA. Today we're in part 2, chapter 7, The Cup. This chapter begins, quote, "As the magic wand is the will, the wisdom, the word of the magician, so the magic cup is his understanding," end quote. The Zohar, from which we derive the present-day Hermetic Kabbalah, begins with a very long analysis of the opening words of the Torah, quote, "Bereshith bara eth Elohim," end quote, which literally translates as, "In the beginning created the essence of gods," end quote. I say this, and I bring this up because these weapons that we've been looking at all point to the beginning of creation as the source of the magic of light. The first sphere created was Kether, synonymous with the divine light, reflected its glory through a prism, creating colors in Chakma, the first state of God being self-aware. In this state, the holy meditated long until it could utter sound, Om, and simultaneously this sound was an understanding of itself in Bina, the mother, who birthed the universe in the likeness of Elohim, who correspond with Bina under the divine name Yod-He-Vav-He Elohim. So when we read in the Bible, quote, "Let us make man in our image so he will be like us," end quote, it is a converse of God with itself, a self-reflection, and the ancients personified the understanding of the nature of God as the Elohim, and alluded to the key of magic, the will, and the source of creation. When we speak of the cup, on one hand, it is emotions and the intuition. On the other, it is the understanding of magic, of self, of nature. A way to use the intuition to bring one closer to truth, with the ability to create, i.e., to do your will. So to continue with this chapter, quote, "And it is also the cup in the hand of Our Lady Babylon, and the cup of the sacrament. This cup is full of bitterness, and of blood, and of intoxication," end quote. In order to cross the abyss, to go from an individual upon earth to united with all, requires this crossing. One must work through every internal blockage to the source of light within, and have little to no karma hung upon their shoulders to weigh them down as they make this journey. If they should succeed, they will be dissolved into a complete being, one with the universe. Their eye will be open, and they can receive the communication of the light through the sphere of Chakma. Quote, "The understanding of the Magus is his link with the invisible on the passive side. His will errs actively by opposing itself to the universal will. His understanding errs passively when it receives influence from that which is not the ultimate truth," end quote. These passages speak on what it is like before and after one has become the mother and made it into Bina. Before the blockages are removed, the mind cannot clearly interpret the light. So think of it as though seeing a light in the distance through a dense fog. Some shapes may be accessible, but you are guessing at most of what there is in the distance. Once you can see clearly because the eye is open, your interpretation is thus more accurate and your understanding crisp. But bear in mind that these are analogies of the state of the spirit, and I'm not referring to the mind per se. All thoughts occur below the abyss. As I spoke about in the previous video, the seed will is in Chakma, but in order to give it definition, it must be birthed through the understanding of the mother and land in the Ruach, where it can have an actual form in the mind. Crowley continues, quote, "There is one truth and only one. All other thoughts are false," end quote. Inevitably, on this thelemic path, this is the view which must come. Everything, one's magical cup, their weapons, their will, their being, must arrive to this conclusion. They must aim their focus upon the oneness of existence, examine it, understand it, and make it their target. Until then, there is a division in the mind and will, and thus they are liable to make innumerable mistakes based on misconceptions. Once getting to this state, quote, "He will recognize that any thought merely establishes a relation between the ego and the non-ego," end quote. So, keep that in mind moving forward, that the cup, like any weapon, is all pointing you towards this one truth, like the light of the hermit which guides you. Let us pause on this chapter for a second and quote from Liber ABA. I'm going to just read the first 4 lines. Quote, "This is the secret of the Holy Grail, that is the sacred vessel of Our Lady, the Scarlet Woman, Babylon, the mother of abominations, the bride of chaos that rideth upon our Lord the Beast. Thou shalt drain out thy blood, that is thy life, into the golden cup of her fornication. Thou shalt mingle thy life with the universal life. Thou shalt keep not back one drop. Then shall thy brain be dumb, and thy heart beat no more, and all thy life shall go from thee, and thou shalt be cast out upon the midden, and the birds of the air shall feast upon thy flesh, and thy bones shall whiten in the sun." End quote. Take this point of view. Hadid is the serpent, the spinal column, and Nuit, that the skull, which this is the same view of Shiva and Shakti. This is why some schools of Asia use the skull as a Kapala to eat and drink from. The skull, being a cup, is then attributed to the mother, Bina, and this is where all thought takes place. Quote, "And as a current of thought is the blood of the mind, it is said that the magic cup is filled with the blood of the saints. All thought must be offered up as a sacrifice." End quote. I take the following view. Every drop of blood which must mingle with the cup is in essence, your ego which lives in the mind, the place where the thoughts arise and declare, "I am I, an individual." This ego must be dissolved into the universal consciousness. It must go further than realizing one is Hadid, a point of consciousness interacting with Nuit, the world around it. Further than realizing there are infinite points of Hadid. It must go further than realizing that as Nuit is infinite space, and Hadid too occupies every single point of consciousness within that infinite, so that there is no difference between Nuit and Hadid on this level. It must then become them in union and thus disintegrated into their offspring, which is all and nothing at once. When your consciousness has thus become fully integrated into the whole, so that there is no you have arrived at the City of Pyramids. This can take many forms, from a symbolic death to a literal one. It varies based on karma, I would think. On this channel, I made a video about the symbolic nature of basic shapes. If you're unaware of how to accurately interpret circles, squares, triangles, and the like, in light of Hermeticism and the Kabbalah, view that video and come back. You should be able to look at the world around you, and when you see shapes and colors, look upon them in a meditative way which can yield essays worth of information about your internal nature and the nature of God externally to then indicate the holiness within. On the cup, in this regard, Crowley writes, quote, "It is round like the pentacle, not straight like a wand and the dagger. Reception, not projection, is its nature." End quote. And there is a footnote that appears that states, quote, "As the magician is in the position of God towards the spirit that he evokes, he stands in the circle, and the spirit in the triangle. So the magician is in the triangle with respect to his own God." End quote. Crowley continues, quote, "So that which is round is to him a symbol of the influence from the higher. This circle symbolizes the infinite, as every cross or tau represents the finite. That which is foursquare shows the finite fixed into itself. For this reason the altar is foursquare. It is the solid basis from which all the operation proceeds. One form of the magical cup has a sphere beneath the bowl, and is supported upon a conical base. This cup, which is a crescent, sphere, cone, represents the 3 principles of the moon, the sun, and fire, the 3 principles which, according to the Hindus, have course in the body." End quote. So you see, there is a whole wealth of knowledge useful just in the shape of magical weapons. In this case, the receptive nature of the mind, in regards to a slew of shapes and hermetic elements. Even the Kapala, the skull from which some yogis would eat or drink sacraments from, it's in that rounded shape, it's receptive. So just keep that in mind as I move forward and I start to really talk about and break down understanding. Crowley goes on, and I'll just paraphrase. "The substance in the Grail is for purification. When a magician sprinkles salt water of the Great Sea about their circle prior to the main ceremony, one of the symbols to be considered is that it is by understanding that the magician is purified. Should everyone worldwide attain to this state, and the human race be purified by understanding, of course we would be in a state of harmony, as the confusion that comes from not knowing, let alone understanding ourselves and the universe we live in, cause great strife, anxiety, and nihilism. Not to mention the destruction of mass populations grasping for straws in the dark as to what they are incarnated to do. Should everyone understand what they need to be doing rather than blindly following the role society has laid out for them, the fights that come from greed, dissatisfaction, and ignorance would probably cease. We would all be too busy doing what we need to be doing, and that leaves very little time to bother with the next person's business. Add to that a universal understanding of the oneness of the universe. Perhaps we could even find ourselves functioning as a single organ in the body of Nuit, rather than white cells going rogue with inaccurate directives and attacking one another, which at present is causing various illnesses on our planet, as you could see. Every time you turn on the news, look out the window at our crumbling ecosystems, or talk about or interact or consider our tyrannical governments that are ruled by corporate handouts. But unfortunately, quote, very many people go about nowadays who are exceedingly well informed, but who have not the slightest idea of the meaning of the facts they know. They have not developed the necessary higher part of the brain. Induction is impossible to them, end quote. I agree further with Crowley that, at least here in the U.S., from which I'm aware based on my own experience from grammar school all the way up to Harvard University, the problem is our education systems. We pound our students with information and force them to do no more than memorize as many facts as possible, hardly ever developing even a dribble of critical thinking skills, let alone how to go inward and sort out one's internal world so that it functions as flawlessly as it can, and further, help them to identify what it is that they should be pursuing based on their nature. We give none of these skills to students and expect them by 18 years old to begin taking courses and take on the stress of deciding what field of work they wish to pursue through their education. It then comes down to more of a financial situation and whether they can even afford higher education in a field chosen as haphazardly as possible. So no wonder many young adults today find themselves anxious and depressed. They have no idea who they are, what they are doing, and our cookie-cutter system that helped produce warehouse manufacturers in the 40s and 50s is broken, as even those jobs have moved overseas, where the cost of production is cheaper and the wealthy pay near no taxes. It is obvious why the country is in chaos. We have over 300 million people crashing into each other because they are flailing in their orbits as stars. I've already given the remedy to this, but I should include before moving forward that at the very least, keeping a magical diary should be a mandatory function in grade school. Of course, privacy would then be a concern, as no student would feel comfortable putting their innermost thoughts into a place that might be used against them. So there are ways to rectify and make sure that that doesn't happen. It would be at least a great start, but I digress. I'll now move forward into more symbolism on the cup as outlined in this chapter and beyond. As the yoni of the mother in the cup of Babylon, the cup is thus the lotus. It is also the mountain within which the remains of Christian Rosenkreutz were buried and discovered in the previous aeon. Now, within the mountain is the babe in the egg, Harpocrates, the infinite potential of existence. Like the cup which holds Amrit, the lotus collects the dew of immortality. The wand which is stabbed into the cup during present-day pagan rituals sums up how it is produced, and Liber 15 is the present-day best example of the symbolic process of awakening the Kundalini to rise up through the 7 chakra, each symbolized by a lotus, until the serpent force has reached its peak in orgasm and come into union with the mother above the head in the Sahasrara, at which point the particle is cast into the cup, gathered and consumed. I cannot make the symbolism more clear to you. That is my limit on this subject. Here, I will quote 2 more passages of this chapter to end. First, I will reiterate the problem that is rectified by the powers of the cup. Quote, "And here again, we find difficulty with our thoughts. The grossness and stupidity of simple impressions cloud the waters. Emotions trouble it. Perceptions, still far away from the perfect purity of truth. They cause reflections. while the tendencies alter the refractive index and break up in the light. Even consciousness itself is that which distinguishes between the lower and the higher, the waters which are below the firmament from the waters which are above the firmament, that appalling stage in the great curse of creation." End quote. We are born ignorant, and only few are lucky enough to have a life experience which shakes them out of their stupor long enough to not only seek the mysteries, but to pursue them long enough to actually succeed in understanding them. Now, secondly, the solution. Quote, "Of the methods of increasing understanding, those of the Holy Kabbalah perhaps are the best, provided that the intellect is thoroughly awake to their absurdity and never allows itself to be convinced. Further meditation of certain sorts is useful, not the strict meditation which endeavors to still the mind, but such a meditation as samsati." Now, from me, a personal quote, in addition to samsati, Mahasatipatthana is in the grade curriculum of AA at 3rd degree equals 8 square in Hod, which is also when the cup is procured by the student. It is a meditational practice of succinct mindfulness. It requires becoming aware of everything about your physical and mental faculties, raising them up into the most effective states you can, and also being mindful of the world around you and ensuring that you interact with it as effectively as possible based on your nature. Now, to continue this closing quote, there's a footnote about these practices, part of the solution to the problems of lack of understanding. See the Equinox, number 5, volume 1, number 5, The Training of the Mind. Equinox, volume 1, number 2, The Psychology of Hashish. Volume 1, number 7, Liber 913, B sharp. These practices and more. So now another note from me. Note, please keep in mind this entire ending summary, even what I've just said and what I'm going to continue to say after, is overly simplified. Much more is required to become whole by utilizing the path of magic. Any student should know that, and I've said it many times, that you need Liber E and Liber O completed before you could get any good results from most other Class B texts by Crowley. So please take that as a given that I am assuming you are aware of the curriculum of AA and mandated practices and tasks to be fulfilled by a student of AA. There are innumerable texts to be completed, and if you are a solitary practitioner, then please follow my channel, as in the future I intend to go over many of these texts, including Liber Ru, which is breathing techniques and understanding of pranayama on a higher degree than Liber E, Liber HHH, Liber Yod, and so many, many more. So to continue this closing quote on the solution to understanding, to gaining understanding, on the exoteric side, if necessary, the mind should be trained by the study of any well-developed science such as chemistry or mathematics. The idea of organization is the first step, that of interpretation the second. The master of the temple, whose grade corresponds to Bina, is sworn to, quote, "interpret every phenomenon as a particular dealing of God with his soul," end mini quote. But even the beginner may attempt this practice with advantage. Let me just stop right there, and if you don't know what the oath of the master of the temple is, or what that means to interpret every phenomenon as a particular dealing of God with your soul, a phenomenon is anything that science currently doesn't understand. You could classify as a phenomenon. Beyond particles, we don't understand anything about our physical universe, where it really came from, where it's going, its beginning, what its possible destruction is going to be. We know very, very little. We probably know less than 1% of all that there is to know about our knowable, seeable universe from where we are on Earth. So take that, it's like most things are a phenomenon. So anything could be classified as a phenomenon. So anything happening right now, if you look around you at every color bombarding your eyes, every sound pounding your ears, every thought in your brain, every bit of information that's coming at you can be a particular phenomenon, a particular dealing of God with your soul. You then have to sort through all of these impressions, find out where is the message from your holy guardian angel. Is there a message coming from all of these sense perceptions and all of these thoughts and conversations and animals squirming by and birds flying and winds blowing and gravity working and forces of nature? Where is God, and how is that to be a particular dealing of God with your soul? What is the message that the universe is trying to tell you? Now, if you're not ready to handle this experience, it could drive you fucking crazy. So, but you could play around with it before you take the oath. You could just try to meditate on what that actually looks like. But once you swear that oath, it's a very difficult thing, because when you're not doing that, all of a sudden you're risking getting into trouble and tacking on some type of karmic oath-breaking scenario. So it could be a very heavy experience. It is a very overwhelming experience. But I just wanted to kind of give some examples. And basically the goal is just to be able to identify your holy guardian angel at all times, or at least when you need to. If it's not every single second of the day, when the holy guardian angel is calling to you, you better know how to listen to it, is the gist of that oath, because otherwise you get a smack upside the back of the head when you're not listening. So I just wanted to put that out there for anybody new or that doesn't really understand that concept. So to continue, just 2 or 3 more sentences. Quote, "But even the beginner may attempt this practice with advantage, and so we find once more that the ego idea must be ruthlessly rooted out before understanding can be attained. This shall regenerate the world, the little world, my sister. These are the words of Nuit, Our Lady of the Stars, of whom Bina is but the troubled reflection." End quote. So that is my lecture on the cup. The only other thing that I could really say that I thought about writing, the contents of the cup, the liquids, right? It's changeable. Liquid can morph into any state. So there's something about the nature of the mind, there's something about the nature of emotions, there's something about the nature of the soul, of the astral light. Things that are very morphable, fluid, changeable, watery. Water could be very still, it could be very invigorating. It's a life-sustaining force, water. It could be very destructive, given heat, pressure, tidal waves. The right influence upon that water can have devastating effects to you or to those around you. So you meditate on how this cup, which holds this water, how do you do this in the proper way in your own life? How do you carry around the water within your own mind, the thoughts, the understanding? How do you bear responsibility for this thing? How do you come to attain this thing? To become united with the mother who holds the cup, how to put all of your being into the cup and be birthed out of it, right? These are all concepts to toy around with, and trying to have the best life experience that you can have. One that is pursuing the ultimate source above the head Kether, and trying to find that Kether and that divine light, that ultimate source of one truth, to examine it, to understand it, to be one with it. So that's the cup. Right, as far as this chapter goes, and a little bit extra. Love is the law, love under will. Cheers.